In a world where power and discrimination have become the rules, there is one person determined to turn everything upside down. This is not a story of revenge, but a bloody struggle against deeply rooted biases, against those who once saw themselves as kings, now forced to face a harsh reality. Today, you will witness a quiet revolution, where every step I take has been meticulously planned, all to bring the arrogant to their inevitable downfall. They've lived for too long in the shadows of their own self-importance, but now, the light is shining, and all their secrets will be exposed. Their only choice is to face the truth. And when power changes hands, nothing will ever be the same again. This is a story of resilience, of dark justice, and of the moment when everything they built on lies will crumble. Join me as we witness the inevitable end, where their greatness runs dry, and those who once stood tall must finally pay the price. A moment ago, they didn't know who I was. Their eyes glanced right past me, as if I were air, admiring their polished black shoes, their refined demeanor, and the skin they assumed didn't belong to someone like me. They couldn't hide their smugness, and their lips curled into a cold, mocking smile, as if everything had already been scripted. I was an outsider, and I should know I didn't belong here. They politely asked me to leave, but the contempt was palpable. I didn't leave. Instead, I stood there, resolute, no need to explain who I was, no need to perform for them. But soon enough, they realized a truth they couldn't deny: the hotel they thought they had carefully guarded, carefully kept me away from, was now mine. Yes, I stood at the entrance of this luxurious hotel, the very place they once thought they had won. And now, I am the victor. I couldn't dismiss the absurdity of this situation. The suit I wore fit me perfectly, as if it had been made for me. My shoes sparkled like mirrors, reflecting the light in the hotel lobby. In my pocket, the key sat silently, but its power was undeniable. It led me into a world I had conquered: wealth, success, recognition. I had overcome every obstacle, even the ones that couldn't be seen. But then a wall appeared before me, not made of stone or glass, but one created by the dark biases of the people around me. They didn't see me. They didn't see my skin. They only saw a shadow on the fringe, someone they believed didn't belong here. I could feel their eyes on me, scrutinizing, judging, weighing my worth. But in the end, that very gaze became the way they defined me. And I realized that, whether they liked it or not, I would continue to exist, because I am who I am, a new image they simply cannot ignore. I'm not a shadow they can dismiss. I'm just a black man, and clearly, I've walked into a world that wasn't made for someone like me. In their eyes, I am an anomaly, a single mistake, an unfamiliar detail that doesn't fit the perfect picture they've created. It's a picture of luxury, where everything is supposed to radiate prestige, comfort, and hospitality. But no, the air here is thick with tension, as if my presence is a lurking problem. As I stepped in, I felt like an outsider in their world. In that moment, the question wasn't, how much money do I have, but rather, how long can I endure before something changes? I didn't feel anger. What struck me more was how quickly these people, in their closed-off world, judge you based on your appearance without caring who you truly are, and that's when I couldn't help but see the absurdity of it all. Don't bother me with how much money I've made, because it could open any door I want. But I've learned an important lesson: money can buy many things, but it can't buy what's been poisoned by human prejudice. I don't need to prove my worth to these people. My story has just begun. As I walked deeper into the hotel, each step on the marble floor felt like a challenge. The grand lobby, lavishly adorned with golden chandeliers, luxurious furniture, and flawless design, these things should have inspired awe, should have made me feel admiration. But instead, I only felt a chill, not from the air conditioning, but from the very people inhabiting this space. Luxury intertwined with arrogance. Everything here seemed designed to display superiority, to make you feel like an outsider. And my goal was simple: to check in, just like any other guest. But as I approached the front desk, I noticed something strange. the hotel staff exchanging quick glances, as if I were part of a conversation unsaid, a topic they didn't want me to overhear. I don't know what's waiting for me ahead, but I know one thing for certain: they can judge me, they can distance themselves from me, but I don't have to live according to the prejudices they impose. They will not get to control my story. I approached the desk where the manager stood, a blond man with a smile that seemed rehearsed. He didn't even glance up as I approached, and I knew exactly what was coming. Finally, when he looked at me, his eyes said more than all the words he could ever speak. He looked at me as if he immediately understood everything about me, from the outfit I wore to the perfection I exuded, but none of that mattered to him. "I'm sorry, but we have no rooms available for you," he said, his tone polite, but what surprised me wasn't the rejection, it was the certainty in every word. He spoke as though he wasn't the one making the decision, as if some greater force was pulling the strings. A system, a formula trained to judge people by their appearance. And now, he was just the messenger. In this world, luxury always walks hand in hand with arrogance, and his words were like the final curtain of a play already written, but for me, that was just the beginning. I could say my name right now, and everything would change instantly. They'd rush to apologize, offer me the best of what they had, praise me, flatter everything about me. But I chose not to break that little performance. I wanted to see how far they'd go, how long before they realized they couldn't continue like this. Just then, a security guard, a massive man with a shaved head, stepped up to me as I stood by the reception desk. His face was indifferent, but his politeness felt forced. He approached with a determined look, as if there was nothing left to discuss. "Please, leave the hotel," he said, his voice polite but unmistakable. No chance for debate, no opening for negotiation. I looked at him, saying nothing. In that moment, I had no intention to argue or prove anything. Their ignorance and arrogance had already become a lesson I would never forget, but not a lesson worth explaining. I turned and headed toward the exit. Each step on the marble floor echoed like a reminder of something inevitable about to unfold. I knew they didn't realize how close they were to the world that was about to change under their feet. They saw only what they wanted to see in me. But I knew, deep down, that their world was teetering on the edge of an unavoidable upheaval. After a few steps, I stopped and turned to look at the hotel one last time. Soon, this would be mine. And then, they would realize how easily they were mistaken in judging me. Illusions can shatter. Weeks had passed since I left the hotel, avoiding unnecessary conflict, but that wasn't the end. I walked on, silently, saying nothing, but that didn't mean I didn't have a plan. During all that time, a clear strategy had formed in my mind. My goal wasn't just to reclaim my dignity, it was to take control of their world. The irony of life is that I've always been one step ahead of those who judge based on appearances. And now, I stood before the same city, the same building, but with an entirely different status. I was no longer a guest, I was the new owner. When I went to meet with the lawyer to sign the papers, what I felt wasn't anger, but a strange, indescribable mix of emotions. I had learned long ago that there was no point in wasting energy on such feelings. What mattered more was knowing this was the moment when insults turned into power. When humiliation became an opportunity to seize control. I had no intention of seeking revenge with petty jokes or childish antics. My goal was far more complicated. I wanted to shatter the illusions they had built for themselves. Their pride would be the very thing that led to their self-destruction. And as I sat in the lawyer's office, I couldn't help but smirk as I looked at the papers confirming my ownership of the hotel. The hotel was now mine, and this was just the first step. After signing the paperwork, I didn't rush. Instead, I went to the hotel with a new objective: to observe all the staff, those who continued working without knowing that their world was about to change. To them, I was still an invisible shadow. My name hadn't been mentioned in any meetings yet. This gave me the freedom to watch them in their natural habitat. The meeting with the hotel's general manager went exactly as I had expected. He was a confident, somewhat arrogant man who always believed he was in control of everything. "Our staff is stable and professional," he said, with a hint of pride in his voice. "We haven't had anyone leave in a long time, and our turnover rate is very low." I nodded, keeping a calm expression, but inside, my certainty grew. I knew their world was on the brink of disaster, and they were completely unaware. I had studied each one of them. It was the blonde manager who had refused to give me a room. It was the security guard who had escorted me out of the hotel. They all had gone back to their happy lives, unaware of the abyss opening beneath their feet. As I walked down the stairs after the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Each step I took was a clear affirmation that in this world they thought was closed off, I was the one in control. And now, they were just pawns in the game I had been playing all along. I paused for a moment, reflecting on the decision I would soon make. Should I act immediately, exposing everything and firing them all in a sweeping motion, or should I let them continue living in their delusions a little longer, enjoying the false sense of stability they had built? The answer lay in patience, in every moment I could use to prepare for my perfect performance. I knew this day would come, and I wouldn't give them any time to prepare. The day I decided to start my little performance arrived unexpectedly. As I walked down the hallway, glancing around the lobby, I spotted him, the blonde manager. He was engrossed in his work, occasionally glancing up from the papers on his desk to check something in his ledger. He didn't notice me, even though I was only a few steps away. But this time, I was no longer invisible. I was the owner of this building, and only I knew it. His face was relaxed, completely unaware that the fate of his job was now in my hands in an instant. I felt how easy it would be to change everything in that moment. One word, and his confidence would crumble, his comfortable life would come crashing down. But I didn't rush. My enjoyment didn't lie in quickly taking him down, it was in watching them dig their own graves, observing how their actions would lead to their downfall. I wanted them to realize their mistake. This wasn't revenge, it was justice smiling silently. So, I turned and continued walking. Each step was more significant than ever before. Today, I was walking into the same hotel, but not as the person who had once left with shame. Now, I returned with a sense of complete power. Everything had changed. This hotel was no longer the fortress where I had been rejected. It was now my domain, and I was ready to take control. They didn't even know they had lost from the moment the day began. There was a tension in the air, as if the space around me had thickened. Perhaps it was just my mind, but I knew I was about to face those who had looked down on me only a few weeks ago. They didn't know that I was brimming with energy. I remained calm, composed, but inside, my determination was boiling. The only question now was, how would they react and they realized their world had changed? Before entering the meeting room, I paused for a moment. I took a deep breath and allowed myself a brief smile. I knew I would do this without any warning, no heads up for them to prepare. That was the point. I wanted them to feel a sense of chaos, as if the ground were slipping from beneath them. When I entered the meeting room, everyone was already seated. They didn't notice me immediately. I chose a seat in the corner of the room, where I could observe everything without drawing attention to myself. The blonde manager stood next to the board of directors, speaking confidently about the day's agenda. He still wore his arrogant air, completely unaware that everything had changed. To him, I was still someone unworthy of attention. But today, his perception of me would be the biggest mistake of his life. I sat quietly, my gaze fixed on the blonde manager standing there. He didn't know that his world had begun to collapse the moment our eyes met. I could see the change in his expression, a brief moment. But enough for me to recognize the dawning realization in his eyes. He stiffened, unable to utter even half a word. First, his face turned pale, and then, almost instantly, a professional mask appeared, concealing his emotions. "Who are you?" he asked, though I knew he already knew the answer. His voice was firm, but there was a chilling coldness to it, as though he was facing something unchangeable. The room fell silent, every eye on us. The attention was focused on this quiet confrontation. I sat there, calm, even with a faint smile on my lips, but in my reply, there was a ruthlessness that no one could deny. "I'm your new boss," I said softly, but it was enough to make the air in the room feel like it had frozen over. The entire room sank into heavy silence. My voice, though calm, had a profound effect on everyone present. I observed the manager's reaction. First, disbelief, then shock, and finally, fear that became all too apparent on his face. This was the crucial moment, and no one in the room dared to speak. It was as though everyone had been frozen, even the air itself seemed to stop, hanging in tense anticipation. The staff exchanged glances, shifting their eyes between me and the manager, as if they were beginning to understand something they couldn't have imagined before. It was the calm before the storm, when everyone knew something big was about to happen but couldn't do a thing to stop it. The manager tried to speak, his lips moving as if he wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. His breathing grew heavier, his face drained of color, and his eyes darted around the room, as though searching for a way to escape the reality he could no longer avoid. I could clearly see the carefully crafted plans he had built over the years now crumbling before his eyes. The illusions he had nurtured for so long were collapsing. He couldn't believe that the man he had once looked down on, the one he thought would always be an outsider, was now his boss. Everything he thought was stable, his career, his status, his power, was now turning against him. Now, he was just another subordinate. And the most ironic part was, the very person he had kicked out was the one now holding control over his life and career. I stood up, unhurried, and walked toward the exit. The entire room remained silent, no one able to believe what had just happened. But this was just the beginning. Just the first step of a plan they had never anticipated. I was ready to transform this hotel into something entirely new, something unrecognizable. I wasn't just going to change the walls, I would rebuild the structure, the systems, everything. After declaring myself the new owner, no one in the room knew what would happen next. They might have expected immediate reforms, or drastic changes. But I wasn't someone who could be predicted. I didn't like to play a game that could be foreseen. I've always been drawn to what lies hidden deep within each person when they stand on the brink of collapse. With each passing day, I become more aware of my own power, a power that can melt away their confidence, their illusions, and all their biases with just a glance, a gesture. I could destroy their world at any moment, but I've chosen a different path, one that's calculated and deliberate. This feeling isn't enough yet, I want more. All it takes is to tear off their masks, and I can make them strip away their own defenses. I want to see them, once invincible in their own eyes, pushed into a chaotic world where the values they once thought were unshakable suddenly crumble. I want them to feel all the pain of the arrogance and prejudices they've built over the years. One morning, as I prepared for the day ahead, a gentle wave of satisfaction rose within me. Finally, I could watch them under the pressure of a completely new reality. They would have to face tasks they once considered beneath their so-called status. I decided to change their schedule. Now, those they looked down on, their subordinates, would be working alongside them, on equal footing, even tasked with duties they once thought belonged to someone else. This was my test, a challenge to see how their arrogance would diminish when faced with these new rules. The first weeks passed, and I watched as a massive game of chess began to unfold. Every move I made was carefully calculated, one step at a time, so that when the moment was right, their downfall would come with inevitability. Every day, I observed, studying their reactions, seeing their arrogance gradually fade, replaced by insecurity and fractures. Those who once looked down on others were now trapped in situations they couldn't escape from, forced to do things they once considered beneath them. The blonde manager, so proud of his selfishness and ego, now felt his confidence crack bit by bit. His pride was eroding as he had to negotiate with lower-ranking staff or supervise small tasks he had never dared to touch. His face grew more tense each day, and helplessness slowly crept into his heart, though he tried to suppress it, clinging to what little dignity he had left. The other employees fared no better. Their trust in their positions and sense of importance began to melt like ice under the sun. They became disoriented, lost in the very world they once saw as their domain. No more long conversations, no more friendly smiles. My satisfaction grew with each passing day, for I knew I was witnessing the breaking down of an empire, a change that was inevitable. Now, I wasn't just the owner of this hotel. I had become the invisible hand, manipulating their fears silently but powerfully. One day, as I wandered through the hotel, I happened to run into the manager in the lobby. He looked exhausted, his eyes full of unease. Despite trying to remain calm, I could sense the anxiety in every gesture he made. He approached me, his voice trembling. "We need to talk," he began, trying to maintain composure. Though his words sounded firm, I knew deep down he could feel the irreversible change. He was trying to convince me of the importance and significance of his role at the hotel. But I knew the truth, everything had changed. I was no longer an outsider. I was here to change not only their jobs but their lives. I stopped, a faint smile playing on my lips, standing before him, the one I had been waiting for this moment with. He was still clinging to the illusion that he was important, but I could feel his confidence slowly cracking, fading away. I wasn't in a hurry to interrupt him, letting him speak, each word, each sentence, as a desperate attempt to hold on to something he knew he was about to lose. His voice trembled as he tried to convince me of his indispensable role in the hotel's success. But I knew those words were nothing more than excuses to mask the fear gnawing at him from within. He was clinging to a power that no longer belonged to him. His words sounded like the echoes of a meaningless argument, for in his mind, he was thinking only one thing: how to hold on to his position under my authority. When he finished, I simply smiled gently, not a mocking smile, but a calm one, full of power, like a wise reminder. I looked him straight in the eye, and I reminded him. "Do you remember, that day, when you kicked me out of here?" His face turned pale, and I saw fear rise in his eyes. In that moment, he realized that all his words, all his efforts to maintain that facade of strength, were in vain. Everything he had built, his arrogance, his false sense of importance, was now crumbling right before his eyes. Silence filled the room. He tried to speak, but his words got caught in his throat. All he had been, all he had created, were now just irreparable fragments. His role, the self-deceiving mask he had worn for so long, everything disappeared, dissolving into the air. He no longer had control over the situation. Now, I was the one deciding his fate. But that was just the first step. Every day, as I walk through this hotel, I feel like I'm playing a giant game of chess. A game where I can predict every move of my opponents, and with each move, their strategies are systematically dismantled. They don't realize that I've been the true master of this game for a long time. To them, I'm just the one lurking in the shadows, an unseen figure, but I know what they don't: their true selves, the lies they hide, will gradually be exposed when they can no longer control the situation. From the moment I set foot in this hotel as the owner, I understood that only patience would allow me to uncover their true nature. I began to challenge them, assigning seemingly harmless tasks, making small changes to their schedules, adding responsibilities to their work, all as part of a strategy one had meticulously calculated. To them, these were just small changes in their daily routine, but to me, they were pieces of a complex web I was weaving. I observe, I study, and I wait. I want to see what they'll do to maintain their positions. Those who had grown used to stability, to power, and their status, were now beginning to feel shaken as the world around them started to change. And I was the one changing it. With each passing day in this hotel, I feel the power that lies deep within me growing stronger. The power not just to change this place, but to change everyone who clings to the power they've already lost. I'm ready to watch them self-destruct, step by step, as I introduce new tasks, make small decisions, just to see how they react. At first, it seemed like these changes only made them uncomfortable. Questions of why things were changing began to surface, but I noticed the truth was slowly revealing itself. One person tried to cover up their mistakes, another attempted to hide their flaws, and the rest, instead of facing the truth, were ready to throw their colleagues under the bus to protect themselves. I sat in my office, watching the subtle shifts in the atmosphere among the team. The tension grew more palpable each day. Over the years, they had built their careers on lies, misplaced confidence, and deceit, but now, with the new rules in place, they were facing a new reality where their old strategies no longer worked. One employee lied about completing a task. Another openly sabotaged a colleague. And another one deliberately shifted the blame to someone else. A short conversation between two employees made everything clear to me. I can't get this done on time, but if you help me, I'll tell management it was your achievement, one said, hopeful. The other scoffed, you don't want me doing your work. I'll just tell them you screwed it all up. That sentence felt like the end. They were willing to throw each other under the bus to protect themselves, to hold on to their own interests. And it was at that moment that their masks began to fall. Each one of them revealed their true nature. At the end of the day, when they all gathered in the meeting room, none of them knew why they had been summoned. But each one could feel the tension. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others tried to hide their unease. The room was heavy with silence, as if something inevitable was drawing near. I stood before them, not in a rush, letting the silence fill the space. It wasn't the silence of waiting, it was the silence of an unavoidable confrontation. I've been watching you all for the past few weeks, I began, my voice calm but firm. And what have I seen? You've been lying. You've been deceiving yourselves and deceiving me. I said no more, letting the screen display the evidence I had prepared. Security footage, documents about their plans, all of it appeared clearly on the screen, exposing every lie, every misstep they had made. Their faces turned pale as they saw the documents, realizing there was nowhere left to hide. Every lie, every scheme, was no longer a secret. I know you thought you could hide behind your lies, but not anymore, I told them, my voice steady but filled with certainty. You've self-destructed. Everything you've built, all the careers you have, were built on lies. And now, it's all fallen apart. The room sank into despair. They knew the game was over. This wasn't just an unveiling, it was the moment they realized their lives, their careers, everything they had, was built on deceit and manipulation. A life based on lies, now completely shattered before their eyes. Every step I take in this hotel has been meticulously calculated, each one bringing me closer to my ultimate goal. Those who once underestimated me are now caught in their own schemes, like flies trapped in a spider's web. But I'm not ready to stop. I know that the deceit and biases ingrained in their minds are not just temporary, they're a way of life. And I need to do more than just expose them. I don't just want to reveal their mistakes. I want them to face the consequences, not on some abstract level, but in the most personal way possible. So, I began restructuring the hotel, slowly, quietly, step by step. Employees lost their privileges, and others were given new opportunities. But all of them would have to face the truth. Those who had lived by lies would now have to pay the price. Under the light of the changes I've made, I began to witness the collapse of long-held values within this hotel. The new employees I hired, mostly black, individuals who had once been discarded by society, now held the power in their hands, in leadership positions that were once only distant dreams. The people who had once been deemed unworthy were now given opportunities that the old guard never even considered. Each day, I watched the conflict unfold, the old employees, those who had grown accustomed to privilege and status, now facing an entirely new reality. They fought to hold on to their positions, but the more they did, the more they realized that the world they had once dominated was crumbling around them. What they had once taken for granted was quickly disappearing, irretrievable. I remember one day when the former manager, the one who had once refused to give me a room, the one I had confronted in the past, had to face this new reality. I walked into the lobby and saw him behind the front desk, holding papers in his hands, his face tense, hands trembling. The man who had once been a symbol of power and confidence was now doing simple tasks he had once looked down upon. A family entered the lobby, mother, father, and 2 children, all black. The manager saw them and his face immediately drained of color. It wasn't just recognition, it was fear. He realized that now, he had to serve the people he had once rejected. The people he had once called inferior were now standing before him, demanding the service he had denied them in the past. "Good afternoon," he said, but his voice shook, no longer carrying the confidence it once had. The father of the family politely replied, "We have a reservation for the week. We'd like to check in." The manager awkwardly nodded and began the check-in process. His fingers moved slowly on the keyboard, his face betraying his failure, looking like he wanted to disappear right then and there. I stood there, silently observing. I didn't interfere. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I saw his pride shattering, torn apart by the very truth he had constructed for himself. When the check-in was complete and the family left, I approached him. He didn't dare look at me, his eyes were fixed on the ground, as if he wished to disappear immediately. He didn't answer right away. I could see his shoulders slump, his face pale, as if all his strength had drained away. "It's just a job," he muttered, trying to hide the despair in his voice. I wouldn't let him avoid the truth. "You once refused to give me a room. Today, you're serving the people you look down on." He raised his head, eyes filled with fear and shame. It wasn't just fear of the new owner, it was the realization of his own insignificance. The collapse of every bias, every shred of pride he had once held. His voice faltered, unsure of what to say. He knew that every action, every belief he had once held, had led to this moment. And now, there was no escape but to face the truth. I didn't say anything more. I just nodded, turned, and walked away. I gave him time to reflect on what had just happened. It wasn't the end, but a crucial moment when he realized that the old order would never return. I knew everything was about to end. Every employee who had once been so confident in their superiority was now facing the greatest challenge of their lives. I watched their worlds crumble as the lies and biases they held slowly destroyed them from within. But this wasn't just about revenge. This was a cleansing process. They needed more than just to recognize their mistakes, they needed to feel the world they knew was vanishing beneath their feet. Today, I decided that all those who had discriminated against me, those who thought their superiority came from flawed ideals, would have to face the truth. Their status had now changed. I gave them one final choice: they could leave, take their compensation, and forget everything, or they could stay and continue working, but under entirely new rules. I knew that many of them wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure. But that didn't concern me. Those who remained would undergo a complete transformation. It wasn't the feeling of victory or revenge, it was the feeling of an ending, as if I were finally closing a chapter in my life. What's happening here is not just a personal vendetta. It's a lesson I have to teach, not just to them, but to myself as well. I stood in the meeting room, where those who once embodied discrimination and bias in this hotel were sitting. Their faces were marked with anxiety and disappointment. These people, who had once held power, now realized that everything they had built was crumbling. The power they had once clung to was now gone. Everything was in my hands, and today, they would have to face the only choice available. I began to observe their reactions. Today, you will have two choices, I said, my voice cold but firm. You can leave, take your compensation, and forget this hotel like a bad dream, or you can stay, continue working, but accept the changes that have been made. The new rules are in place, and you must follow them. Some of them lowered their heads, nervously shuffling papers in front of them. These were the people who knew they couldn't survive in this new order. They had decided that they couldn't accept the change, and they would leave. They looked at me vaguely, understanding that their options were limited. Others, those who had nothing left to lose, looked at me with uncertain eyes, but also knew that there was no other way forward. I'll give you the chance to choose, but remember this, I continued, my voice still resolute, if you choose to stay, you will have to change everything, your attitude, your work ethic, and your worldview. Some of you won't be able to bear it. At that moment, one of the old managers, the one who had refused to serve me when I first arrived at the hotel, raised his hand. And asked, so what happens if we choose to leave? His voice trembled, unable to mask his fear. His face was full of worry, as if he were standing at the threshold of life and death. I looked him straight in the eye, without hesitation. If you leave, you'll start from scratch. No more privileges, no more protection from old connections, only the opportunity to rethink your life. But at least you won't be living in the lies and arrogance of the past. His face darkened, and I could see that he recognized the bitter truth, his old life, built on discrimination and flawed privileges, had now completely collapsed. He would have to face a reality he could no longer deny. A few days later, on their last working day, I saw some of the employees begin to pack their things, preparing to leave. They couldn't accept the change and didn't want to face the new order I had created. The ones who remained began to adjust to the reality, realizing they were no longer the ones who stood above it all. The biases, the misguided feelings of superiority, were gradually being erased. One morning, I walked into the hotel lobby and saw the former manager standing near the exit. His shoulders were slumped, his posture drooping like a man defeated. This was the man who had once refused to give me a room, who hadn't cared who I was or why I asked for his help. Now, he stood there, fully aware that everything had changed. I approached him and stood right next to him. He didn't look at me, his eyes were fixed on the floor, as if he wanted to avoid everything. I calmly spoke, don't you think you should know who I am? But he didn't answer. His face remained blank, his eyes hollow. I could see that deep down, he realized something, his entire life had been built on faulty foundations. Everything he had once been proud of was now gone. He simply nodded, his gaze still downcast. Then, he quietly walked out the door. I stood there watching him, feeling neither anger nor satisfaction. It was simply an ending. The end of a story that began with humiliation but ended with justice. I understood that this wasn't about revenge. It was the closing of a chapter in my life. Those who had once thought themselves rulers now had to face the truth they had been avoiding. And I, standing there, witnessed the collapse of everything they had built, knowing that justice had finally come. Thank you so much for your continued support of the channel. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. In the content creation process, there may be some small mistakes, and we hope you'll kindly overlook them. Wishing you all happiness, peace, and good health in life. Stay tuned for more.